All right, it's like my fourth time recording this thing, so we're gonna get through this and it's gonna be great. Okay, let's go. So welcome back, everyone. This is lab 4, and we're going to go over the appendicular skeleton. So the goal of today is to help you all be able to identify bones of the pectoral and pelvic girdles, identify important bone markings on the appendicular skeleton, distinguish between right and left bones on the skeletal models, and identify any of the 206 bones in the human body. So first, we'll go over the pectoral girdle in the upper extremity. So we have the clavicle, or your collarbone, the scapula, or your shoulder blade, the humerus, which is the bone in your upper arm, the radius and ulna, which make up your forearm. Next, we have the carpals, which make up the bones in your wrist. Then we have the metacarpals, which are the bones found in the palm region of your hand. And finally, we have the phalanges, which make up the bones in your fingers. So here we have an interior view of the shoulder joint. We have the humerus and the scapula, which is tucked behind the rib cage. We're also going to look at some joints in today's video. So here we have the acromioclavicular joint. And you'll notice that the joint is named after the bones that come together. So on the scapula, we have a region called the acromion, and we can see that area here coming together with the clavicle to form the acromioclavicular joint. Here is a more detailed look at the scapula. You can see that acromion region again. Then there's the coracoid process. There's the glenoid cavity, which is where the head of the humerus sits to create the ball and socket joint of the shoulder. The medial border is going to be on the side of the scapula that is more towards the spine, like your vertebral column. And the lateral border is going to be on the side that points away from your body, on the edge of your body. Make sure you guys remember the directional terms we went over for the first practical because they will come in handy when trying to figure out what side a structure is on. So make sure you remember directional terms and anatomical position because those are very important. Here is a posterior view of the right scapula. Again, you can see the acromion process, the coracoid process, the medial and lateral border, and some of the other markings on the scapula. Make sure you guys look over this a few times and can identify the different portions of the scapula. Here is another view of the scapula looking directly on the side into the glenoid fossa or the glenoid cavity. Again, make sure you guys review these images and can identify the parts of the scapula. The shoulder joint is one of the most important joints in the body, and it's also the most unstable joint in the body and is highly prone to injury. This is a detailed look at the humerus. We have the head of the humerus on the proximal end, and it's going to sit against that glenoid cavity of the scapula. We have the greater and lesser tubercles, the deltoid tuberosity, which is where your deltoid muscle or the main muscle in your shoulder is going to attach. And then on the distal end, we have our lateral and medial epicondyles, our capitulum, and our trochlea. The capitulum and trochlea are going to be what form the part of the elbow joint. So this exact image can be found under the art labeling activities in the study area on My Lab and Mastering. Make sure you guys do those a couple times because more than likely, hint, hint, I will take this exact image and ask you to label a few structures on the humerus on the practical. So this is a posterior view of the humerus. Again, we can see the head of the humerus up here, the greater tubercle, again, that deltoid tuberosity, the medial and lateral epicondyles, and the trochlea. Again, practice labeling these on My Lab and Mastering. Here is an interior view of the elbow. At the top, we can see the distal portion of the humerus and where it attaches to the radius and ulna of the forearm that make up your elbow joint. The capitulum here is going to articulate with the head of the radius, and the trochlea is going to articulate with the coronoid process of the ulna. And then this is a posterior view of the elbow joint. Again, we have the distal portion of the humerus and the proximal portions of the radius and ulna. You can tell the radius and ulna apart by looking for the rounded head on the radius and the pointed olecranon process on the ulna. Another trick you can use is that the ulna is going to be pinky side and the radius is going to be thumb side. And then here again, we have the radius and ulna, which make up the forearm. So key regions on the ulna or the olecranon, the trochlear notch, the coronoid process at the proximal end, and the ulnar styloid process down here on the distal end. And then the key regions on the radius are going to be the head, the radial tuberosity for the proximal end, and on the distal end, we have the radial styloid process. Make sure you guys go over these because they will be on the practical. And here is just a posterior view of the radius and the ulna. And then this is a detailed look at the proximal end of the ulna. Again, we had the olecranon, the trochlear notch, the coronoid process, and the radial notch. And then this is the distal end of the radius and ulna. And here we can see how the two bones articulate together to begin forming the wrist. All right, so this is a view of all the bones in the hand. We have carpals, we have the metacarpals, and we have the phalanges. So we're going to start with the phalanges. Each finger has 3 phalanges except for the thumb. You can see the distal, the middle, and the proximal phalange. And the thumb is going to have 2 phalanges. It's going to have the proximal and distal phalange. And the thumb also has a pair of sesamoid bones. Next, we see the metacarpals, and they are just numbered 1 through 5, starting on the thumb side. So we have metacarpal 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And then we come to the bones that make up the wrist. When it comes to remembering the bones in the wrist, it gets a little complicated because there's a lot of them and they all have funky names. So we use phrases or mnemonics to help us remember them. The one I use the most is Sam likes to push the toy car hard. Sam represents the scaphoid bone here on the thumb side. Likes is your lunate bone in the middle. 2 is your triquetrum bone here. Push is the pisiform bone that's on top of the triquetrum. The is your trapezium bone over here back on the thumb side. Toy is your trapezoid bone here. Car is your capitate bone here in the middle. And last we have the hard, which is the hemate bone here. Another phrase you can use is straight line to pinky. Here comes the thumb. So for that one, straight is your scaphoid, line is your lunate, 2 is the triquetrum, pinky is pisiform because the pisiform is on your pinky side. Here is the hemate, comes is the capitate, the is the trapezoid, and thumb is the trapezium because the trapezium is right below the thumb. You can use either one as you like, as long as you guys can remember the order and the names of all of the carpals in the wrist, because you will need to know that for the practical. And then this is just an x-ray of the hand where you can see all the individual bones. So next we'll go over the pelvic girdle and the lower extremity. So we have the os coxa or the pelvis bone, and that's made up of 3 parts: the ilium, the ischium, and the pubis. We have the femur, the patella, the tibia, the fibula, the tarsals, the metatarsals, and finally the phalanges. And here is the anatomy of the pelvis. We can see the sacrum and coccyx, which are part of the vertebral column. that also extend down in towards the pelvic region. So the pelvis bone or hip bone is actually made up of three separate regions. We have the ilium up here, which is the top of the pubic bone, the pubis here, which is in the middle, and then the ischium down here towards the bottom. And then the two sides of the pelvic girdle are separated by a piece of fibrocartilage in the middle, and that's called the pubic symphysis. Kind of like the sutures in the skull, the pubic symphysis is another immovable joint here. And then here is a more detailed look at the bones that make up the pelvic girdle. For this, make sure you can identify the iliac crest, which is the edge of the ilium, the obturator foramen, which is the big opening that's going to allow blood vessels and nerves to run down towards the lower extremities. And then the acetabulum, which is the fossa that the head of the femur is going to sit in to make that hip joint. And then also know the pubic tubercle here. So here is the anatomy of a femur. At the proximal end, we have the head of the femur, the greater and lesser trochanter. And then remember, trochanters are only found on the femur. The greater trochanter is going to be on the lateral side, and the lesser trochanter is going to be on the medial side. At the distal end, we have the lateral and medial epicondyles, and those articulate with the tibia to form the knee joint. And we also have our patellar surface, which is where our patella sits on top of. This image is also on my lab of mastering, and you will most likely see it on the practical. Hint, hint. And here is a closer look at the patella or your kneecap. For this, know where the apex is on the patella and know where the surface of the patellar ligament is down here. And then here is the anatomy of the tibia or your shin bone and our fibula. Easy way to remember the two is big fib, little tib. So the easiest way to remember the difference is big tib, little fib. Big tib because the tibia is the bigger bone in the lower leg, little fib because the fibula is the smaller bone. This figure is also on my lab of mastering under the art lab activities of the study area. So main focus here is the tibial tuberosity, the fibular head, and the medial and lateral malleolus. So here we come to the foot, and it's very similar to the hand. So each toe is going to have three phalanges, except for the big toe. It's only going to have two. And again, we have the distal, middle, and proximal phalange. And then we're also going to have five metatarsals, metatarsal with a T, numbered 1 through 5, one starting on the big toe side and going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then finally, we have the tarsals or the ankle bones. Just like the hand, we have a phrase we can use to remember these, and that phrase is never totally consume curdled milk. Notice that the milk is MILC, and that is because we have three cuneiform, which I'll show you here in a second. So for mnemonic, we start on the medial side or the side with the big toe. So never is your N, and that is your navicular. Totally is the T, which is your talus. Consume is the calcaneus. Curdled is your cuboid, and then we come to milk. So milk, we have three cuneiform. We have our medial cuneiform, which is the M, the intermediate cuneiform, which is the I, and the lateral cuneiform, which is the L. The C in milk just means cuneiform. And then pay attention to the talus and calcaneus, and notice how the talus lays on top of the calcaneus. So again, make sure you guys go over these bones. There's no real easy way to remember them other than knowing that mnemonic and knowing the order that they go in. And then you will see these again on the practical, so make sure you know them. And then lastly, we have the three arches of the foot. So we have the medial longitudinal arch, which runs from the heel towards the big toe on the medial side of the foot. We have the lateral longitudinal arch, which runs from the heel towards the pinky toe on the lateral side of the foot. And lastly, we have the transverse arch, which runs across the foot from the medial side to the lateral side. Okay, so that's it for practical two. That's all the material you guys are gonna need. Make sure you guys are studying. Please come to open lab this week. I will be there again on Friday, and then come to my office hours on Wednesday. Um, yeah, I posted a study guide for you guys, so hopefully that'll help you study for this practical. And let me know if you have any questions or need help with anything. Please don't be afraid to shoot me an email or come to my office hours. I'm here to help you guys, so please do use me as a resource. All right, that's it from me. I will see you guys next, or I guess I'll see you guys tomorrow in lab.